Welcome, everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. The webinar will begin shortly. It will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last portion of the conversation to respond to the questions you post. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed on Friday to all who registered, and we are streaming the webinar on Facebook Live. All resources that you see shared as links in the chat will be compiled and shared in a follow-up email to all webinar registrants, and materials are accessible on GLR's Community Learning for Impact and Improvement platform, aka CLIP. We invite you to take a few seconds to create a free account if you haven't yet done so that you don't miss the material shared today. Lastly, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Lastly, before we start, I would just like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. We will be rounding off the month of December with these final 3 sessions. Next Tuesday, December 14th, we will be having Connecting Evidence-Based Strategies with a new place-based initiative in Dayton, Ohio, followed by Promotion Policies in 2021, ensuring students are ready, not retained. Finally, on Tuesday, December 21st, we will have philanthropic opportunities to promote early relational health. Information and registration for these upcoming sessions will be posted in the chat box. Joining you now is Sarah Torian, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesday session, Inspiring Young Minds Through Out-of-School STEM, co-sponsored by Overdeck Family Foundation. Some of you in the audience might be wondering why an organization with a name like Campaign for Grade Level Reading is hosting a webinar focused on science, technology, engineering, and math programs. So I just wanted to share a little bit of background and context before we get started. The Campaign for Grade Level Reading is rooted in a commitment to disrupting generational poverty and ensuring more hopeful futures for children in economically disadvantaged families. We know that 3rd grade reading proficiency is an important early indicator of success in higher grades, high school graduation, and later career success. So for the past 10 years, we've been working to ensure that all children achieve this early milestone. But we also know through abundant research that students who achieve math proficiency are also more likely to graduate, complete college, and be prepared for the workforce. So we view promoting both reading and math proficiency as being critical to our work to disrupt generational poverty, and we've increasingly embraced efforts to promote children's early math skills in recent years. Now, after a year and a half of widespread school closures and data showing that many children, especially children of color and children in economically disadvantaged families, have fallen behind in math, we are eager for more opportunities for promoting learning in math in innovative and engaging ways. High quality out-of-school STEM programs do just that. They can help boost children's learning, improve math achievement, expose children to new and exciting career opportunities, and nurture their social and emotional needs. Today's conversation will feature leaders of several innovative STEM organizations who are working to ensure that more children have access to the hands-on, experiential, and collaborative STEM programming that can engage them in learning and help them succeed. And to begin that conversation, I am incredibly honored to welcome and introduce our moderator for today, Gemma Lenowitz. Gemma serves as Program Officer for the Inspired Minds portfolio at Overdeck Family Foundation, where she supports direct impact and ecosystem organizations that expand access to high-quality after-school and summer STEM programs. She previously served as STEM coordinator at the high school level, coaching the robotics team, teaching bioengineering and computer science, and implementing ed tech and project-based learning. So welcome, Gemma. Thank you so much for joining us today and also for all of your help in planning today's conversation.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you today to discuss out-of-school STEM. Just like the campaign, Overdeck Family Foundation believes that all time in a child's day can and should be used to set them up for success in school and in life. And yet, unfortunately, this last year and a half has been characterized by widespread disparities in access to learning, social interaction, and student and teacher well-being, leading to disparate outcomes. This exacerbated already widening gaps between the highest and lowest performing students and girls and boys. And while many education organizations and educators, including many of you here with us today, employed creative solutions to remain operational during the pandemic and keep students learning, research shows us that the effects of the COVID slide are pronounced, and even more so in math than in reading. And that's where we think out of school time can be so important. We know this time, which makes up to 80% of a child's life, can build the academic and social emotional skills that help students succeed. Specifically for science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM skills, out-of-school time allows students to approach knowledge and content in innovative and personalized ways, providing freedom of choice and agency that's often missing during the school day. Out-of-school programs might be seen as extras, but for many families and children, they are essential, both from a learning and childcare perspective. According to a recent report by the After School Alliance, for every child in an after-school program in America, there are 3 waiting to get in. That's why I'm so excited for today's conversation with 4 leaders in the after-school STEM space. We'll use this time together to better understand the benefits of STEM programs, the value of the out-of-school context, and the innovations and partnerships spurred by the pandemic. I'm excited to also talk about how after-school STEM should factor into decisions about relief fund spending. And of course, to answer all of your questions, which we welcome through the Q&A. And with that, I'm honored to welcome and introduce today's panel of leaders in this work. First, Navdeal Johnson serves as the National Program Operations Manager for Imagine Science, where she manages a national network of communities, supports program evaluation, and leads project expansion. Nav began her career as a summer camp counselor and has held a variety of positions within organizations supporting youth and families. Welcome, Nav. Thanks for being with us. Next is Britt. Britt Magnuson serves as Executive Vice President for Education Outreach at National Inventors Hall of Fame, managing district and school-funded programs nationally. She joined the organization in 2012, having previously worked in public education as a teacher, principal, curriculum director, and executive director of federal and government programs. Thanks for joining us, Britt. Nick Monzi serves as CEO of LearnFresh, a national education nonprofit he co-founded in 2013 with a mission of enhancing students' STEM and social emotional achievement through sports and entertainment. Nick has worked with global corporations, urban school districts, and national and regional after-school programs to implement the LearnFresh community program model, engaging 30 pro sports teams and reaching more than 400,000 students. Thanks for being with us, Nick. And last but not least, we have Chris San Antonio, who serves as Manager of Research and Evaluation at the Museum of Science in Boston, where he oversees all formative and summative evaluations for EIE, the curriculum division. His team designs and implements local and national pilot tests to ensure the museum's products meet the needs of educators, students, and families across the country. Thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon. To kick off our discussion, I would love to go around the virtual room and have each panelist give about a 3-minute introduction to the work that you do. Please give us a 30,000-foot view of what your program does, where you're based and where the program operates, and whether it operates during the school year, in the summertime, or both. Nav, I'd love to start with you.
Thanks, Gemma. It's great to be here today and really appreciate the opportunity to share more about what Imagine Science is doing. I am the National Program Operations Manager for Imagine Science. We are a very unique initiative, a partnership of the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, National 4-H, Girls Inc., and the Y. We were launched in 2015 to bring more STEM programming to underserved and underrepresented kids. And next slide. We are currently in 9 communities. We have 11 funded projects, and each of these communities has a team that is some composition of the 4 partners. For example, in New York City, there's multiple Boys and Girls Clubs. In Houston, there's multiple 4-H partners in the team, but we're really focused around collaborating and sharing resources, and that is the foundation of the program. We fund the sites for 3 years with the hope that they will sustain and continue to operate. And I'm excited to say that since 2015, all of the communities are continuing to collaborate, even through COVID. They've become self-funded, and we are entering an expansion phase, which is really exciting for us, hoping to be in 20 communities by 2024. Next slide. A quick snapshot of our program. So, as I said, we are really targeting underserved and underrepresented youth. Programs are free. I wanted to highlight that 65% of our programs are implemented during the summer. We started out as a summer-only initiative, but we've really evolved over time. It's determined by local needs. So we have a lot of partners that are programming in the summer, spring, and fall, depending on what's going on. Next slide. So as I said, it's a unique partnership. We really focus on collaborating and sharing resources to improve and increase STEM opportunities for kids in the communities that I shared. It's locally developed. So each local team decides like what curriculum they're using, what their program schedule is, their sites, how they share resources, or the role that the partners play. We really provide a framework and a lot of support throughout the year to support program implementation. I think the most significant areas that are important is project management. We really try to make this not be a standalone. Like, we don't want to fund 3 years and at the end of 3 years, this is done. So really supporting the local teams and integrating Imagine Science into their regular operations. And I think we all know curriculum and staff training are the greatest needs. 4-H has played a really important role as a national partner in bringing these resources to the teams. And also program evaluation, we have a network-wide evaluation plan. Everybody participates across the local teams and across the communities. And next slide. I'd like to share a little bit about our impact. So we're looking at data that has about 2,500 responses, and we've worked closely with PAIR since the very beginning, and some of you may be familiar with their work. We're using the CIS Youth Survey and the Dimensions of Success observation tool, but you can see there's a lot of really good things happening in Imagine Science. And if you want to learn more about it, please visit the website. There's a couple of briefs that really speak to the power of collaboration, how teams have gotten through COVID, how they've been innovating. We've had our most successful summer ever, which was a surprise. And I think that's it. Thanks, Gemma.
Thanks, Nav. We'll dive more into what you learned this summer a little later on. And I'd love to transition to Britt to hear more about Camp and Club Invention and the programs at National Inventors Hall of Fame.
Thanks so much. It's an absolute honor and a pleasure to be alongside of you and my esteemed colleagues. So the National Inventors Hall of Fame. We are a national preschool through adult nonprofit organization. We provide programs in both the out of school and in school space. And our programs emphasize problem-based learning, guided or independent inquiry, really fueled by a child's innate curiosity. We incorporate the design thinking process innovating through hands-on learning, and all of our programs incorporate STEAM or STEM and invention education concepts. Simply put, our approach is that we believe that all children need high levels and systematic levels of exposure to innovation. Next slide, please. What you are looking at here is the fact that we are based in all 50 states in Puerto Rico. We partner with community organizations, school districts, public, private, and parochial schools. And our education STEAM programs, as you can see here, begin in preschool and continue to adulthood with our professional development programs for educators. We've been in this space for over 30 years, and we have served more than 2.5 million students. And this summer, we were privileged to engage and inspire approximately 210,000 children and 122,000 underserved children. Throughout all of our programs, we have really 3 pillars. We recognize, learn from, and are inspired by the inventors who are inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame, such as Marshall Jones that you just saw pictured in the earlier slide. We also have a collegiate inventors competition where those folks come together and share their innovative ideas. But what's important for all of you on the call is to know that those inductees and those collegiate inventors, their work, their habits of mind are integrated into the curriculum and experiences that we provide children. Next slide, please. These learning experiences are about providing educators and our approach to provide families and children this environment to explore their innate curiosity and creativity. So provided to our educators are all of the open-ended materials and curriculum along with professional development. So therefore, particularly now, our educators, our partners can focus their energy on the joy of learning with their students. We've also developed family resources with lots of exciting experiences for families to explore at home. Next slide, please. So because we have a 30-year history in this out-of-school STEM space where we've gathered lots and lots of data from educators, lots of data from parents and children, we are also happy to provide, for those who are interested in learning more, peer-reviewed articles, evaluations, some of them are listed on the right-hand side of this slide, and technical reports about the efficacy of invention education in general and our programming. Next slide, please. So ultimately, what our approach is as Camp Invention and the National Inventors Hall of Fame is that we believe that invention is a fundamental human disposition and that all children are strong and capable protagonists of their own learning when they are presented with high quality program. And in light of this changing world, particularly now, all children, we believe, need opportunities to experience innovation, invention, and reinvention, not necessarily whether it's a prototype or a thing, but actually having those habits of mind and those skills where they can reinvent and invent their own lives. As one of our educators so succinctly put it in a survey data from this summer, basically, she said it really well. She said STEM programs, out of school time STEM, what we're talking about today, can help open the eyes and change the viewpoint of how STEM can help all students, not just advanced learners. And that is our approach with our programming with any child at any pace in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Thanks, Gemma, for the opportunity to provide that 30,000 look.
And we'll pass it over to Nick to learn more about Learn Fresh.
Perfect. Thanks, Gemma. I appreciate you having me here today. So I'll start by sharing just a little bit about the big picture of the organization and where and how we were founded. Our nonprofit was launched in 2012 to specifically serve as a home for the NBA Math Hoops program. NBA Math Hoops was first created by a math educator in Southern California in the late 90s as a board game in his classroom. And over the following 15 to 20 years, it was expanded from that initial launch into a national program supported by the NBA and WNBA, Hasbro, and a number of other national partners. I'll talk more about that program in depth in a minute, but just to give you context for how our organization has evolved, we've really become a part of a larger mission that's focused on engaging students through their passion points, particularly in sports and entertainment, things like music and arts and the like. And because of that, our vision has expanded to include more than just the NBA Math Hoops program. We now have a suite of experiences that are either launched or in development across other sports and other interest areas, which I'll cover in just a second. Also, our team is very representative of the community nationally. One of the things that I love to share is that all of our program staff have actually participated in the NBA Math Hoops program in their own community or in their own school or program before joining Learn Fresh. So for those of you who may engage with us at any point in the future, our team is very much a member of the teaching and education community and the OST community. Let's take a look at the next slide. So a little bit more about NBA Math Hoops. The program has evolved past just being a board game. You can see it there on the screen, but it's now become really a suite of learning experiences for students that includes the physical game, a series of digital apps that include real-time NBA and WNBA player data, kind of like almost like an educational fantasy league for kids, a wraparound classroom curriculum, which really frames the experience into the context of a basketball or sports season for the classroom. And then we've worked to develop relationships with professional teams, leagues, et cetera, over the last decade, where we're now running a series of community events throughout the country each year that include teacher training, student championship tournaments. If you could picture like a sports playoff with an NBA Math Hoops game, that's essentially what we host in communities across the country each year. That process really began in the city of Cleveland in 2013. As Gemma mentioned, we're working with close to 30 professional team and league partners now and have engaged over 450,000 students. And one of the most important things about the game of basketball, which I love for our work, is that the game has become so global. So over time, we've realized that there are these incredible applications for this work, this specific program in parts of Africa, Asia, Australia, and that continues to grow year over year. We now have formal programs in development or launched in each of those continents as well. And then finally, I talked a little bit about some of the other experiences beyond just the basketball program. We now have a baseball program, which is close to a national partnership with the Major League Baseball Players Association. We've just launched a pilot of a soccer-focused program in Sacramento. And then we're looking at other opportunities to engage students. Eco Tour, which is a program model in development right now, is focused on the use of a performing artist tour to get students excited about sustainability, sustainable practices, and financial literacy. Finally, kind of big picture, we've also thought about ways that we can influence the sector in different forms. We have a fellowship program, a Learn Fresh Fellowship, which is specifically focused on really empowering educators to build content and curricula like our work, but through their own lens and through their own life experience. And then our Assist Tracker program in partnership with the NBA actually provides grants to schools and programs to help refurbish STEM spaces in communities. So we're trying to work at both the programmatic level and then doing some work at the bigger picture institutional level as well.
Awesome, so exciting. I sometimes have to remind myself that NBA Math Hoops is for kids because it's just so addicting, but it is actually intended to be used not by adults, but by kids. If you have a favorite sports team, basketball team in particular, it's so much fun to engage with kids and rally around a common interest in their success. And it's really fun to see the player statistics. So we've heard a bit about science, invention, and math. And Chris, I'd love to invite you in to tell us about engineering as elementary.
Sure. Hey, everyone. So happy to be here with you all. Thank you to Gemma, and thank you to the Campaign for Grade Level Reading for having me. My name is Chris San Antonio, and I'm the Manager of Research and Evaluation for EIE. EIE is basically just the curriculum division within the Museum of Science Boston. So you can think of the museum as sort of, brick and mortar, but EIE has a national presence. We've been on the scene since around 2003. We are impacting roughly 1.5 million students every year and around 100,000 educators. If you go to the next slide, the purpose, the mission of EIE is to create a generation of problem solvers. And it's a lofty goal. And so one of the ways that we do this is by creating a whole bunch of different avenues to bring youth, students, educators into the learning space and to make it meaningful for them. On the next slide, you can see a bunch of different curricula that we offer through EIE. So we start as early as preschool by offering the We Engineer curriculum. In the elementary grades, we've got a whole bunch of offerings. Our flagship curriculum, sort of what began it all for us, Engineering is Elementary, is right there, as well as our computer science curriculum that we just started a few years ago. We've also got flexible curricula that we've designed for the out of school time space. It's also, you can also use that in the formal school setting. But what I'm psyched to tell you a little bit more about today is our EIE Families program. This is one of our newest programs. And as you can see here on the far left, this has been designed to engage children and youth as young as 4, as old as 11. And if you go to the next slide, you can see a little bit more. So these resources are free. You can download them right from our website, eie.org/families. The whole point of this program is to bring engineering and computer science learning into the home environment. Basically, the impetus here was, our team was feeling back in 2018, like, wow, we're having this great impact in formal school classrooms. We're having an impact in the out of school time setting. But we know that's not the only place that STEM learning is happening. It's also happening in the home. And so how can we be there? How can we nurture it and foster it? And so EIE Families sort of began with this idea that, why not create activities that allow families to do engineering, to problem solve together? This activity here is called Bye Bye Bug. The idea here is this brother-sister duo find a ladybug in their room at night. The brother is like, ew, bugs, get it out. The sister is like, oh, but wait, they play an important role in pollination. Let's be safe. So they have to use engineering to solve the problem and to safely remove the bug. If you go to the next slide, we've got 5 of these at-home engineering activities. We're creating more this year. We're actually in the middle of a multi-year engagement, thanks to some very generous funding from the Overdeck Family Foundation. So more of these activities are coming. And all of this development is sort of the purpose of this is to, yes, foster an understanding of engineering and computer science, but what else can we do with these activities? We're thinking we can foster communication within families. We can foster communication between families and educators, either formal school educators or out of school time educators. We can foster social emotional learning. So here you can see a few of the things that we've measured over the last few years in this program, but I'm also happy to report that we're in the planning phase right now for an experimental study. We'll be doing a randomized control trial of EIE Families so that we can say for sure what impact we're having and what the learning gains are of this program. So super psyched on that and psyched to be here with all of you, and I'll hand it back to Gemma.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks to all of you for your program overviews. I see so much engagement in the chat. Please feel free to keep chatting our panelists about specific program questions. But I think now that we know a bit about each program, I'd love to zoom out even further and talk about out-of-school STEM programming at large. Can you all talk to our audience about why STEM learning and skills are so important and what makes the out-of-school context well-suited to supporting STEM learning for students? I think I'll jump to you, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first part of that question, why it's so important, one of the things that we always think about when we're building programming is, how can we engage students at a foundational level that they can leverage for the rest of their life? And I think one of the great misconceptions around STEM education is that it's something that you only need if you're in a certain career, or only if I'm going to become a scientist, right? And the reality is that we use math skills every single day when we're buying things or figuring out interest rates, right? These skills are universal. So the why around the skill sets personally is a no-brainer. I think STEM in the out of school time context can serve a really, really important connective role between what's happening in the school day with students and what is happening at home and with family. We often talk about trying to build bridges between the classroom and then, family members, parents, guardians, et cetera. That can be really hard, but the out of school time space serves as both this childcare mechanism and also as this learning mechanism. One of the things that we've tried to do with our program is to specifically think about how we can support all three of those spaces kind of continuously, right? So how can our programs live in a school day classroom, live in an out of school time program, and live in the home, and provide students with this really wraparound experience? I think it's important to note that, the STEM that happens in out of school time doesn't need to be the same STEM that's happening in a formal classroom setting during the school day. But if those two things can talk to each other, that's really powerful for the students.
Absolutely. And it's really powerful to have those bridges built so it sustains support for students. I think on that theme of building bridges, Imagine Science is doing this across organizations within a region. So Nav, do you want to add anything to Nick's point there?
Yeah, definitely. Gemma, I think, collaboration is the key for Imagine Science. And so we know that makes things more cost effective, but it also is improving how STEM's delivered in out of school programs. So we're starting with youth development first. I think that's really important. That's the foundation of everything we're doing in STEM. And I think that's what's engaging kids in programming. And, what Nick said, it's like, these are skill sets that are important all the time, everywhere. And the more we share resources and expertise in Imagine Science and improve staff capacity, we're seeing that it becomes part of how they work with kids all the time in every program. And I think what's important in out of school time with STEM, at least in our program, is every kid participates. This isn't like a STEM camp or kids who are pre-selecting STEM. These are kids who are in after school and everybody gets to participate. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And setting the table for that requires a lot of intentional planning on the part of organizations to make sure that the program models are well set up for every student to participate. Britt, I know National Inventors Hall of Fame has done a lot of work on inclusion. And I wonder if you want to talk a bit about that context and how that fits into why STEM learning is important for you all and why out of school time is a good place to explore it.
I think we have two things to answer that particular question about why STEM learning and skills are so important. And we come from the perspective is that they're not just so important, they're critical. And in order for us to have a society where children and adults can go from figuring out solutions to problems, those habits of mind need to start early in terms of thinking of a way to find a problem and then thinking that I have the context, I have the ability to solve that. And I think in STEM, when it's hands-on and it's phenomenon and it's observing and making my thinking visible, it does two things. It not only gives credibility to children to think that they too can do this, and they do have this. We see so many transformational experiences with children who never thought of themselves as a real problem solver, but they build something or they think of something and they use opportunities for failure as a way to grow, as opposed to having it be a setback. So I think it's just critical those STEM skills, particularly in light of what we're facing as a nation and as the world in terms of what decisions we're making to help children. Then the second question was, well, how does the out of school context suit that? Well, what we find in Camp Invention and working with educators, as I'm sure my colleagues do as well, is that teachers have a full plate during the school year, and it's loaded. And so having that out of school ability to take a risk as a teacher themselves and to sort of not always have to be the center stage, the sage on the stage, but be able to have those kinds of iterations, I think is a wonderful lab catalyst, opportunities for teachers to have light bulbs go off in their heads as well. Like, oh, I never knew Frankie had this kind of, because he's making his thinking visible in his hands-on learning. So those are our kind of two takes on not only why they are not just important, but critical, but also then what they do for teachers in that out of school space. It provides that risk-free. It provides, a breathing room for teachers to experience that themselves.
Thanks, Brent. Chris, before I jump to you, I'll just quickly share that a lot of times when I tell people I used to teach engineering at a high school level, the reaction is like, wait, engineering is a class now? And there are teachers who lead that. And, is that true in every high school? Do they have that in elementary and middle school? So I'd love to hear from your perspective why out of school time is a great place to explore engineering.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I definitely didn't have it when I was in high school. I wish I had. I actually had Odyssey of the Mind when I was younger. And maybe that got me on my path. But yeah, I think it was put in the NGSS in around 2013 or so. And since then we've seen it sort of growing on the national stage in terms of standards and in terms of taking up instructional minutes for educators. I'd echo everything that the panelists have said so far, that that this stuff is really important for youth in terms of the habits of mind. It's important for our society and our country in terms of jobs and the jobs of the future. And it's super important to mate it with that OST setting, because as we know, the folks that we want to get into the STEM fields, the folks that are the most underserved, tend to be a primary audience within the out of school time setting. So it's a really good way to direct this type of resource, this type of instruction to an audience that can really use it, that needs it most. In terms of engineering, I mean, I love it. Like, I mean, I might be biased, but like, I love it. Like, I love the problem solving and the whole mindset and the engineering design process. I feel like I was born to do it, but even though I don't have a degree or anything like that, but I think it's sort of naturally engaging youth and its participants to kind of, inquire, ask questions, follow that process, problem solve, think about the way things work, take things apart, create things and destroy them. And that stuff is fun. So I think it's also really well mated for the out of school time setting, where educators aren't necessarily as stressed around instructional minutes, around meeting standards. There's a little bit more flexibility there. They might have a little bit more leeway to have fun with things. So yeah, roundabout answer there.
Thanks. I'll transition to a topic that not everyone views as fun, but comes to us from one of our panelists, which is we had a question asked about the cost of your programs. So let's talk about cost and funding for a few minutes. Can each of you share which components of your work are free and which are fee-based? And maybe we can talk a little bit about the American Rescue Plan. So in light of these extra dollars set aside through the American Rescue Plan, totaling $2.44 billion specifically for after school and summer learning, how would you encourage states or districts to think about funding after school programs with these funds? And what should those decision makers look for and consider when deciding what to bring to their schools and communities? Chris, should we jump back to you?
Sure. That's an eye-popping number. 2.44 billion is a big number. Although when you think about the need that's out there, when you think about the number of programs, how many times that pie needs to be sliced, and how historically under-resourced our OST sort of infrastructure is in this country, it's not a lot of money. So I think this question of how can decision makers sort of make the tough choices with regard to allocation of funds, I think it's a really poignant question. I guess, just from my selfish perspective, I'm a research manager. So I'd say one of the tools that folks could use when thinking about allocation is thinking about program efficacy, program impact, and how programs understand their impact and understand their efficacy. So in other words, what tools are they using to measure their outcomes? Are these, experimental scientific efforts that they're employing? Are they rigorous Are they maybe a scrappy startup that has incredible intentions and ambitions, but maybe they just don't have a research basis yet? That might be a lens to look at this through, because matching a program's sort of stated outcomes with actual outcomes is sort of the whole purpose of research and evaluation. So I think that's one tool that decision makers can use.
Thanks. And I was recently informed by my colleague that I misspoke calling an attendee a panelist, which I think maybe also speaks to my scrappy nature as a moderator. Starting up this first time hosting with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. So thank you to the attendee for that question. Chris, can I circle back just quickly? I know you shared that the EIE families resources are all available free online. If there are other curriculum options or after school program options that folks are looking for, would that be associated with a fee to make sure the programs can run on your end?
Yeah. So it's a great question. So if you visit EIE.org, you'll see a whole bunch of different resources there. Most of them, I believe, are available for purchase. So our, engineering is elementary curriculum, the flagship in-school curriculum is available for purchase. There are quite a few options that are free as well, and specifically our NASA-funded out-of-school time curricula. We've got several units that are directed at grades 3 to 5 under a program called Engineering Adventures, and another few units geared toward grades 6 to 8 out of school time called Engineering Everywhere, and those are available for free download. So takes a little bit of poking around on the website, so I encourage you to go to EIE.org to find those.
Thanks, Chris. I'll jump over to Britt to learn about National Inventors Hall of Fame, your sort of fee structure, and what you think about how decision makers should consider after school programs when they are faced with deciding how to spend this huge sum of funds.
Yeah, I guess I want to, I've been in education for a long time now, and I believe that there are moments in history and in education, particularly pivotal moments, when we find ourselves at a crossroad. And I think we're at that point. I think the pandemic revealed what we all know, being in education, what we all knew to be true is that all children do not have equal access to opportunities. And I think that the decisions that we make now that directly affect children will define our future. So I first would suggest and say that our experience with district partners with the American Rescue Plan funding is if not now, then when? If we have the resources and districts can, as Chris was saying, can take risks, can have play and fun in a way that maybe with the assessment, kind of heavy load that teachers have, if not now, with the American Rescue Plan ability to change the trajectory of what students are experiencing, and then I'm not sure when that time is going to be. And I would ask, what is the purpose of schools when you think through the decision of the kinds of programmings that you're offering children? Is in our opinion, is to advance opportunities for all children to thrive as decision makers. And the way that happens is through innovative, engaging, materials. We were fortunate to be attending the National Summer Learning Conference a couple of weeks ago in Washington, D.C., where we heard Secretary Cardona talk about how he saw learning in summer that was better than the school year. And having those accesses to that wide range of materials that catalyze and extend and make thinking visible, why not do it in a space that can then promote that during the school year? I think as Nick has mentioned. So high quality programs that provide the materials to support that method of investigation does come with a price tag in many instances. And what we know to be true from our teachers in our programs this summer, as well as prior to the pandemic, is that reinvigorating teachers at this point must provide them the materials and the curriculum and all of the things that they need so they don't have to keep doing. We all have stories about teachers, staying up till midnight when the pandemic first hit, coming up with ideas and coming up with curriculum and being burnt out. So I think that's my first piece of what to consider is doing something like my colleagues on this call about engaging children, having children want to run into the program and want to attend. The second piece is the National Inventors Hall of Fame. We do have a large amount of scholarships and developmental money that we use for our underserved populations. We have relationships with probably 1,200 districts across the country where we have supported our programs through the American Rescue Plan, and then before that using Title I. We are a fee-based program, and we work really closely. We consider ourselves to be partners with districts. So we look at what is needed, what needs to be flexible and customized in order to have these kinds of innovative experiences for children. However, at the same time, I would encourage everyone to get on invent.org as well as what Chris was saying with EIE and look at, we have a Ready Set STEM activity. There's a myriad of activities and things that teachers can do and families can do that are accessible and free and quite a bit of educator blogs and white papers and a wide variety of resources and support for teachers.
Thanks, Britt. We'll make sure that link is in the chat as well. In light of these extra dollars, I think we heard Chris speak earlier about the after-school infrastructure. Now, if we jump to you, I'm curious if you can talk about, how you would encourage states and districts, as well as the intermediaries that support after-school programs as key partners, and what should decision makers look for and consider in structuring those partnerships?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Gemma. Echoing what everyone said already, the out of school time space is really important. I think we've come a long way. There's culturally relevant, it's age appropriate, it's high quality STEM. Like that's what Imagine Science is working on, is to really professionalize the staff, access high quality curriculum, whether it's 4-H. We use EIE at a lot of sites. There's a lot of resources out there, but on their own, one of our partners doesn't have the capacity to find the curriculum, train the staff, get the kids engaged. And so that's where we're collaborating and working together. But I think for us, it is the infrastructure. And I think that's what we're hearing. Like we need staff support, we need facilities, we need staff who have enough time to prepare and train, because they can be STEM experts in after school. And it's like, they have to be prepared and supported and ready to do that. And I think there's a lot of curricula out there, yet there's such a gap between curricula that exists and after school staff having access to implement programs the right way in a high quality way. So I think that's where Imagine Science really comes in, and we try to partner as much as we can with some of these other presenters to bridge that gap to help staff access the right type of curriculum. So I think that's important. I think the investment in staff is the biggest thing we've heard in the last 12 to 18 months. Like right now, we can talk about wait lists and kids not being served. And I hear a lot, like the first time that a site's ever closed due to staffing shortages, not a lack of kids, not a lack of engagement, not a lack of parents feeling comfortable sending kids to after school. It's like very key. Why are we staffed? It's not because there's a lack of need on the kids side. So like that's an investment that's really important. So I think that's what I would say. For us, it's a little different, right? Because we're in select communities. So we're very thoughtful process about where we start in Imagine Science and which teams can participate. But there's a lot that we've learned that can be applied to any community, any youth development organization that wants to collaborate to expand access. But it's like you have to have the staffing and the space to do that.
So often when I talk to leaders like you all, I hear components that resonate from the program model in your own thinking. So we're asking kids to collaborate in STEM programs, and we're asking them to come up with creative solutions to problems. And it's exactly what you all do as program leaders day in, day out, to find those partnerships, to find the right resources, and to figure out how to create the best possible product, even sometimes in pretty constrained settings. So Nick, anything to add on the American Rescue Plan question? And can you also address any costs associated with your programs?
For sure. I'll echo what Dom said. First off, is that making sure that the spaces exist and are well staffed in the OST space right now, it has to be a number one priority. And I think that has to really come before any programmatic decisions that can be made, just because of the turmoil of the last year, the staffing turnover. Here in Philly, we actually had a call earlier today with the STEM Equity Collective in the city. And we were just talking about how some out of school time providers are underutilized right now in terms of they have the capacity, but students aren't showing up in certain neighborhoods. And then in other neighborhoods, they don't have the staff or they don't have the building that they need and they don't have the capacity to serve. So evening that out can be a big impact of that 2.4 billion. And then beyond that, I think including student and also staff agency voice engagement in the process of selecting programming can be really, really valuable. There could be a marginal benefit in terms of research or something like that for one program over another in a certain discipline. But if students and staff don't actually believe in that program, it's not going to make a difference, right? So thinking about what will resonate with your students, talking to staff and understanding which programs you've implemented with them in the past that have actually been successful in the context of implementation. I think that's super, super important. We've seen, time and again, staff that we work with who just like, this program could be great, but it just sits on the shelf the whole time because it doesn't make sense for us in our context. In terms of our programs with LearnFresh, MBA Math Hoops, all components that exist right now are completely free. So the classroom program, the board games are actually donated by Hasbro, so we can provide them to schools at no cost. All of our funders and team partners support the training and the support that we provide to educators. And then we have a pair of mobile apps for MBA Math Hoops that are actually free to download and use as well. This upcoming summer, we may, for the first time, have some sort of a paid experience. We have this classroom or program kit where students can actually play Math Hoops on a basketball court, but it includes some more intensive physical materials. So there will probably be a cost associated if you follow along with us over the next year.
Thanks, Nick. I hope that addressed our attendees' question about costs, and feel free to follow up with any individual panelists to learn more about your local context. And I want to circle back to the staffing piece. So, we heard a lot of commentary on how important it is for staff to have the capacity to serve kids, for educators to have the right mindsets to create positive learning environments for youth, and to make sure those staff feel supported and prepared and have opportunities for professional development and leadership within program pathways. I think it's easy to talk about the benefits of participation in out-of-school STEM for students, but we talk less about the benefits for educators, and yet I think there are huge benefits to participation in out-of-school STEM for addressing challenges that educators face in and out of the classroom. So Brent, should we circle back to you to talk more about that, as you are a principal and have seen teachers in lots of different contexts?
Well, I think the benefits for teachers, and I agree with Nick and Nav about, the staffing. We're seeing that quite a bit about, again, this notion of the pandemic and teacher fatigue and those kinds of things. I think the benefits, and we see this, we talked to lots and lots of educators. Yes, last year alone, in addition, like my colleagues, in addition to our own ongoing conversations that we have, we received, formal feedback from about 1,200 plus educators. And what we know to be true from speaking to our educators, as well as seeing the faces of them and their students, is the benefit in the out of school time when it is high quality, which everyone on this panel is all in that boat. But when it is in high quality, the reason why teachers got into this work in the first place, as a teacher, I think I can say that, is to see the joy of learning, to teach kids to go from the known to the unknown, and to have children think of themselves as owning their own learning. So the freedom when a teacher or an educator or a paraprofessional is in that environment and does not have to take the full responsibility for making sure that the learning is happening, but release it over to the students, there becomes this reinvigoration of why you got into teaching in the first place. And I can only imagine I've not been privileged to see the programs that my colleagues have, but I would assume that that would be the same piece, that out of school time is that risk-free, centering it on the students, which is why teachers and educators got into this work in the first place, and then partnering with programs, organizations who deliver the content and the materials and provide that scaffolding. So then a teacher can breathe and be, okay, I got this. I got this now. And I think what we've seen firsthand, and then also from our research with our educators, is that reinvigoration, and that the thing that brings them back when you can actually see a child rely on play as a strategy for learning and be happy. I remember, Gemma, you talking about in one of our webinars that it's great to have a program, but if no one wants to come and the kids don't walk in the door and they don't want to have, I mean, okay, so then what? And so I think I'm extremely positive about even all the things that were going on, because I know as a teacher myself and as a principal that teachers, that's why they got into it in the first place. And then having that benefit of matching. No one can do it themselves. Nav is absolutely right. Not one organization, district. So having you, Gemma, and GLR put people together so folks out in the world can see, like, I don't have to do it all myself, and I can reinvigorate my teachers. I can get a joy of learning and have rigor, and have children think of themselves as problem solvers, and their ideas have value. That's the benefit.
And especially for educators to feel that self-efficacy, that they had an impact with that student. Now I'll pass to you. I think because you have this breadth of program experience, also starting as a summer camp counselor, I'm curious to hear how this resonates and how you're thinking about innovation. And I think I saw Christine describe this as reimagining staffing. Any suggestions there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we talk about diversifying and the STEM field and being more inclusive of people of color, like after school is the place to be. If you look at the staff, they represent the communities that they serve, and they're more of a generalist, right, for many reasons. And so building the staff expertise and confidence has been one of the unexpected, super positive outcomes of this initiative for Imagine Science. Like, our initial outcomes were very youth learning based and youth impact based, but this is one of the biggest things that we've seen coming out of our network, is that we are creating people or helping staff become more confident in facilitating STEM, which is improving STEM quality. It's increasing student engagement. And I think that's what's different. We all know out of school is a special place as a summer camp. It's like we're building a different type of relationship, not better, but different than school time. And there's a way to engage students in STEM that does carry into the school day. And I think that starts with staff expertise. And what I see a lot is, we staff with what we have. And so we don't have STEM experts necessarily. People are assigned to teach STEM. And it's like, how do we prepare them? And part of what Imagine Science has been able to accomplish is sharing the resources around training, but also building these teams. So it's like, there's 3 people at the Boys and Girls Club, but 4 people at the Y in Houston with 4-H and Girls Inc. They're all teaching the same STEM. So they're all working together and talking and meeting and sharing their challenges and figuring things out. It's not just you and your organization with your 1 or 2 people teaching STEM. And that has been really a significant part of what Imagine Science is doing. So I think we can't say enough about the investment around supporting staff and preparing them and making sure we're getting them prepared and confident to teach STEM, because they have a very unique ability to connect with kids in after school. And so I think that's really important. So yeah, for us, it's like we're focused on serving underrepresented kids, but at the same time, we really are diversifying the STEM workforce through the work.
Appreciate that. And so much of this applies to educators broadly, which are youth development professionals. They can be formal classroom teachers, but the Campaign for Grade Level Reading believes parenting adults are often a child's first and best teacher, and grandparents I saw referenced, and aunts and uncles, or peers, mentors, cousins. There are so many educators in a child's life. So Nick or Chris, I wonder if you want to jump in on the idea that those other educators, informal educators, are experiencing benefit and engaging with their young people in their life on STEM.
Definitely. I think this is one of the areas in which I think the school day has a lot of work to do, but in the out of school time space, and then also in the home, an educator in whatever form who's empowered to work with students in those spaces often has agency to activate their own skills and their own creativity to get the student excited about learning. And programs that cater to that, programs that help build effective connection between adults and youth can be really, really powerful. One of the things that we like to do is we talk about our educators, whether it's the teacher at the parent at home, or the grandparent at home working with their child, or the educator in the out of school time space. We often call them coaches because they're working in that mentorship type role, right? Which is a little bit different, and it opens up opportunity for different type of influence. One other thing that just comes to mind as I listen to folks talk, I think one thing that can help facilitate a great educator experience in any type of setting is just clarity of resources. So this is more for folks in our world, but I often see program providers overcomplicating the way that they deliver information to educators. And I think one of the best things that we could do is to just make the delivery process as clear as possible, because then it opens up the opportunity for that creativity to really thrive.
Chris, do you want to add anything, or should we jump to this question on social emotional learning?
Just very quickly, would echo Nick's comments on accessibility of language. And I think that gets at a couple of the questions that I saw just around how do we make these things accessible for all different types of educators, whether they're grandparents or whether they're formal classroom educators, is thinking about the audience when the resource is being developed and ensuring that we're testing it with multiple different audiences or with a representative sample, so that we know that it's functioning well for all different types of consumers.
Absolutely. And functioning well means building STEM skills, but it might also be building social emotional skills. And we know how beneficial those are, especially this year. So I'd love to hear you sort of opine on how programs you offer can be so important to students facing pandemic-related challenges. And Chris, maybe just to jump back to you, thinking about families, the shifts in the family structure this year have been so significant. How are you all thinking about that?
Totally. I think, one of the things that happened at the start of the pandemic is we thought to ourselves, geez, like this is a little chaotic. This is crazy. This is upending systems that we've all become very used to. And how can we be most helpful in this time? To answer that question, we actually reached out to educators and families at the start of the pandemic and basically just said, tell us about some of your struggles right now. Like, how can we be helpful? What type of curricular resources do you need? What does access look like for you right now? So we basically went to our audience to answer some of these questions about how we can be most valuable. And one of the things that kept coming up was the social emotional learning piece, that this is really taking a toll on students and youth. And how can we create resources that foster those skills? How can we use the home environment or the out of school time environment to nurture those skills? So that's part of what we're doing with the EIE Families program, is we're developing activities that they're not just focused on teaching engineering or teaching computer science. They're also focused on giving families a chance to spend some time together to communicate. We hear a lot of parents or caregivers say, wow, I had no idea that my child could be so creative. And oh my goodness, the solutions that they came up with are mind-blowing. And a lot of it is around their perceptions of their children's efficacy. So there's, I think, a lot of good work that we can do there that sort of is coming as a result of this challenging time.
Appreciate that. Nick, I'll jump to you on this piece about social emotional learning, of course, the social aspect always makes us think about kids in physical groups together. And during the pandemic, a lot of your work was forced to take part virtually. So can you talk to us about that shift and how it impacted some of the work you do and what you noticed about students' social emotional learning virtually?
Definitely. It was definitely a challenge to reconceive elements of what we have historically done. We had a couple specific responses to it, and some of those will stay with us over the longer term. One was to host a series of events in a virtual setting, basically over Zoom, where students could actually like play the board game, the Math Hoops board game, simultaneously, but in different places. They would each have a game and they would be playing with one another. That evolved into the creation of a digital Math Hoops game where students could actually play either kind of one-off or with each other. And we found that even without them having the face-to-face aspect of playing the board game, they would play a digital game and then they would get on their virtual classroom and like, you know, not necessarily trash talk, but they would be like, you know, saying, oh, I beat you in this game, or I won this game, you know what I mean? So it created that degree of connection that was hard to replicate exactly as we existed before, but it was a good substitute. One of the other things that came out of the pandemic was just the ability to reimagine how we're applying the physical product in that on-court setting that I mentioned before. A great way for students to play, but also be socially distanced, was to play basketball on a court, right? So we thought about how we could create context for Math Hoops to live in an actual playing on-court basketball setting, and that was a big one as well. All of kind of big picture lesson is that all of those things are sticking with us now, and all three of those lanes, the board games, the digital games, and the on-court experience, are going to be a part of our programming post-COVID, later COVID, whatever stage we're in right now, which is really a big win for us as an organization.
Britt, I'll jump to you to talk about how your program shifted into this virtual space and anything you noticed about the parent or student experience with social emotional learning.
Well, we just like my colleagues, when the pandemic hit, we were, we typically do face-to-face programming. And so in March, our district partners basically said, with eyes, as big as saucers, we can't just do, virtual screen swiping. So what can we do to be able to continue our STEM work in school and then after school? And so typical, you probably are all too young to remember, but saving the cereal box tops and then having them, saved, and then you get something sent to you in the mail. And that's what we did. So we created a virtual component to with an online component with a coach and children being able to be on screen, but then off screen, they received sort of this box of really highly curated materials that they were able to then do. What we found, and we call that our National Connect program, what we found, because we have, in our opinion, social emotional learning is like not a separate program. You can't just do like, oh, now we're doing, let's switch, we're doing social emotional learning now. It needs to be embedded, obviously, in everything that a child does, whether that's grounded in purposeful dialogue, whether that's sharing of ideas, whether that's, embracing those full range of emotions, which, unless you have that, no one can learn something. What we found with our National Connect program, when children were on the screen, from parents saying things like, it's hard to put into words because my child's not creative. I think someone just said that in a minute ago. I could not believe that they actually put this together and were reticent to put their face on screen, but then after the second day, they were really, really engaged. So we were able to do that both virtually, which we think is extremely important, because that is a thing that we will not let go of in the future as we move forward, because we have many rural partners whose children cannot get to a STEM program, and the virtual world works really well. And when you put in that social emotional piece in that, it's really, really important. For us in our normal programming, if there is such a thing anymore, social emotional learning is embedded in the invention education process. You can't, inventors really very rarely invent something in isolation. And so that's kind of a very much embedded into the way that we operate with children. So.
and the way you were able to retool the program model. Nav, how about you? Were there any significant challenges of moving remotely, I'm sure, and any unexpected benefits for students or staff, and any learning about social emotional benefits?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the partners are youth development organizations first, right? So I think everybody shifted to virtual. Some of the partners stayed virtual for a lot longer. What Britt's saying, we definitely heard engaging rural programs through 4-H especially. I think we've heard from some boys and girls clubs that they're able to engage older youth in a way they couldn't before. So those things will continue, but it's definitely hard doing interactive STEM virtually. And I think the priority was to maintain connections to caring adults and give kids some free space to be with each other. So even though they were online all day for school, they would still show up after school virtually to just see each other and play. And do what they could. So I think, a lot of sites transition back to in-person as quickly as possible. And definitely that's where STEM has picked up again. And I think what I've heard really this past summer is that it became an opportunity to get kids ready to go back to school in person. Like from the basics, like wearing a mask, like what we're hearing from teachers now, kids don't know how to play on the playground together, or they're so chatty in class because they're with other humans. There's like so many different things that after school is helping kids get ready to go back to school. But I also think that we hear a lot about helping kids deal with their fears and their questions around COVID and around being back in school. And so really try to create a place, like this is kind of a side thing, but we launched a new program. It's a book club, and it's based around the case of the COVID crisis by Penny Noyce. And it was just an opportunity to do something that focused on SEL, but also COVID. And it really became a vehicle to talk about fears and concerns. So I think it's been really different. I know our partners, it was like, how quickly can we get back in person and get hands-on STEM? So they're excited to be able to do that now.
I hope all the attendees are with me in just admiration and appreciation for all these program leaders at what they overcame in the past year and a half to make sure that these programs continue to serve students and families and teachers across the country. I do want to end on a positive note of the panel before we jump to some Q&A. There are so many challenges that students and educators are still facing today, and yet your programs are all growing with indicators of strong impact throughout. What makes each of you optimistic about the future, and what do you hope to see in after-school STEM in the coming year or the coming decade? Chris, how about you?
I love that. I love that question. I guess one of the things that makes me feel optimistic is that we're here now having this conversation. This is a conversation that's on the national stage, and we are, we're stakeholders in it, and we're acknowledging our role. We're acknowledging that there's work to be done, and I think we're sort of taking it head on. So I think the fact that the philanthropic sector has stepped in and provided a bunch of funding in just the last couple of years to address some of these programs in need and the disparities that we're seeing. The dollars that we were talking about earlier that are being dispersed as we speak. There are a host of programs now that are taking a really strong look at their outcomes and their efficacy, and they're using rigorous data collection and analysis tools to understand and report out their impact, sort of leading us down a road of more evidence-based programs. So I think there's a lot of work to do, but there's a lot of really good stuff happening, and I'm proud to be a part of it, and I'm proud to be here with all of you, discussing it and continuing to make progress.
Chris, we're proud to be with you too. Right, what makes you optimistic about the future?
Well, I am optimistic about the future in this regard. We have a long history in the National Inventors Hall of Fame, and in the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen districts who actually are courageous and inspired to do something different for children. And not only are they doing it, but they're coming back and they're saying the kids loved this, the teachers loved that. It was the catalyst that's going to make us go differently. And for that, because I believe, and I guess I can say it controversially, I don't know if we've done all that great up until this point in the normal school space. And I think the empowering teachers and educators to empower children is something that I've seen happen in the last 5 or 6 years in a growth rate that has not happened before. And when we look at underserved children, we call them sort of the lost Edisons. When we look at the opportunity to be able to give all children these innovative experiences, I'm extremely optimistic.
Now, how about you?
Yes, I agree with both Chris and Britt. I think the unique needs of specific communities can't be ignored, and we know that, but now I think more people know that, and just we've had to collaborate in more different ways. I know we keep saying collaborate, but it's like with schools and after school, or within youth development organizations, or with parents and families in different ways. And it's like we can't forget that we were able to do that, and I think that's what's going to keep moving forward and hopefully improve how we work with kids and families. So that's what I'm optimistic about. And honestly, heading into COVID, we were like, will we still have all these communities collaborating? There's so many other things they have to take care of. And here we're on the other end of it, and we still have Imagine Science up and running everywhere where we did 2 years ago. And so I think that's important for us as a project, but just big picture, I think we always have worked together, but now I think more people want to work together with us in our field, and that's really important.
And in the spirit of collaboration, Nick, why don't you round us out and tell us what you're optimistic about or what you hope to see in the future of after school STEM?
For sure. For me, it's really about creativity and the way in which that's evolved in our space in particular. My personal entry point to education was in music education and still is. I still do work in that space today. And I could sit on a panel like this for music education and have the same conversation about all the benefits and the reasons why I think it's important that we teach students the arts. But STEM and science, technology, the processes through which students learn in those spaces are highly collaborative, as we've talked about throughout the entire panel, and are filled with so much creativity. And I think the programs that are now being activated in out of school time are really reflective of that. They have, as Britt said before, social emotional learning embedded within the infrastructure of them on a much more frequent basis now. And I'm proud to have been a part of that growth over the last decade and excited to see where it's going to go in the years to come.
Fantastic. Well, I hope all of you who attended today share our optimism for the future of out-of-school STEM. And with that, I will jump to some important questions I see you all contributed. There's a question from Alan Gutman. How important is it for out-of-school STEM resources to include instructions or guidance that is targeted to and accessible for parents in languages other than English for parents who do not speak English, or available in video and audio format for parents who may not be literate? And there's a question from Caroline about grandparents. Students who are raised by grandparents may not have STEM as a priority at home. And we could maybe weave these questions together to think about how can the out-of-school time STEM sector make resources that are accessible to all family members? And how do you think about language, literacy as important factors, as well as STEM interest or STEM cultural factors?
I can jump in on that one. So I think we sort of touched on this just a few minutes ago, but to dig a little bit deeper, from a curriculum development standpoint, I think it's really important to acknowledge that the resources that you're creating aren't being consumed by just one person or just one type of person. So being really thoughtful during the development stage about who are the audiences that you want to impact, who are the audiences that you want to have access to your resources. For EIE in the Museum of Science, it's everybody. It's like we want to have everybody accessing this. In fact, I think it's in the Museum of Science mission statement. It's like it's like surfacing science for the good of everybody, for everybody. So, and that's totally not the mission statement. I totally messed it up. So hopefully no one from the Museum of Science is listening right now. But so it's about everybody. And I think we need to be really thoughtful when we're developing these things and have the grandparent in mind, have the formal classroom educator in mind, have the out of school time educator, have the person in mind who's intimidated by engineering or computer science. And if you can keep all of that in mind when you're developing it, then you're going to use language that's accessible for multiple audiences. You're going to use multiple languages, not just English, so that your resources can be accessed. One of the things that we've been doing these last few years is we've been developing in more than one language. So we don't just develop in English and then translate into Spanish. We actually develop in Spanish as well. And that helps us see some of the pitfalls before we get to the end of development, when there's no more time to make changes to the resource. It helps us gather feedback from a Spanish speaking audience while it's still early enough to make improvements to the resource. So all of those things, very long-winded, sorry, but all of those things I think get at that question.
I'm happy to tackle parts of that as well. On the accessibility piece, game-based learning, and this is maybe a little bit of a biased perspective, but I think game-based learning can be really powerful because it often doesn't require a lot of language. That's one of the things that we found, and it often becomes easier for us because we have less to translate, which means we can access folks in a broader spectrum of geography and culture. And then the question about grandparents I thought was really interesting. This is not necessarily a professional opinion, but just maybe more of a personal opinion. I think one entry point, right? This is another thing that I've had conversation with folks about recently, is at what point can you expect families to contribute, and at what point can you not, right? And what is reasonable to activate in that space? One thing that a grandparent or that generation might engage with more readily is something like financial literacy, right? Which is something that's a lifelong experience for all of us, and something really important for just overall generational wealth and just access in society. So maybe think about something like that. What is one entry point into STEM that is accessible for the folks that you're working with specifically? Hone in on that first, start to build some buy-in, and then potentially grow from there.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing that I could add, Gemma, to that, the grandparent piece, is this notion of tinkering and making and hands-on learning. And I think what we've seen with grandparents is this ability to take apart the mixer, and that's okay, or take apart the the vacuum cleaner, see how things work internally. And so grandparents being a resource of before those skills of looking at using a hammer and using pliers. We see a lot of children who, that's the first time they've seen tools and actually using them. So for us, grandparents are a really great resource in that sort of tinkering, making, figuring out how to solve a problem using one's hands.
Thank you all. We also got a question about STEM mentors within programs. Do you want to talk about the role of STEM professionals or other sources of mentoring, and how mentoring can be impactful in the context of out-of-school STEM?
So STEM mentoring meaning someone that's attached. We have our sort of reason for being in terms of the National Inventors Hall of Fame is this notion of perhaps not physical STEM mentors, but actually having role models of folks who've actually done something, and this is how I went through it. And so whether that's on an interactive video or it's in a some sort of a curriculum piece, is really, I think, very, very important. And the diverse STEM mentors in a diverse way of looking at how do kids see themselves as future innovators, future problem solvers. And so we take that very seriously in terms of women STEM mentors and folks of color, to be able to look at those innovators as the representative of the population that we work with.
Just agreeing with what Britt's saying, after school, at least in our program, that career connection is really important, and to make sure that the people that are coming in to talk about STEM are diverse, not just diverse as far as their ethnicity or their race, their gender, but also diverse in the types of STEM that they're teaching. So there's so many things, and I think the partners do a really good job to look in their community for all kinds of people to come in and talk to the kids.
At that point now about the diversity of STEM experiences that are possible in the professional sector, and there's so much innovation happening right now. And we've been saying this for years, but there are jobs created that kids will have that don't exist yet. And so I think I'll translate that a bit into Safia's question here about great community-based organizations bringing rigorous STEM learning to urban and rural under-resourced schools. Safia, I would point you to these 4 great community-based organizations and more. But maybe on this urban and rural piece, we can talk more about what STEM looks like in different geographic contexts, and how do you all think about cultural relevance or economic relevance of different STEM content or skills for different populations?
Jump in there quickly. I think one of the ways that we think about it is through meaning making. We know that a sort of requisite for youth to engage in the activities that we create is that they need to find some relevance there, some meaning, some reason. And so we try really hard during our development process, and this goes for EIE families or any of the other pieces of curricula from EIE, to build that meaning making within the activity. So we are touching on different cultural aspects that we feel will bring in youth from underserved communities. We're touching on languages. We'll actually use vocabulary in the activity itself that is distinct to a particular culture, so that students from that culture will see it and will be like, wow, I know what that word is. Everyone else in class is learning it for the first time, but I know that word. So we do that through imagery, through language, through context setting, and also through the problem that gets solved in the engineering activity. So again, I think this question kind of comes back to the development process and being really thoughtful about how are you bringing in, creating inroads for the learner? How are you making it relevant and meaningful for them?
And I guess I agree with absolutely everything Chris just said as well. I think because the regional approach, we are in such a variety of regions across the country, a variety of districts, a variety of populations. We really try to work on embedding in the curriculum, teaching in some instances, teachers to ask big questions, that they have the hope that the children have some relevancy to. And so by opening up and understanding that those big open-ended questions are the things that are going to allow a child to go from the known to the unknown, no matter what kind of cultural norm they have or language differentiation, that I think is a real big plus for us, because it can't be scripted so closely just from one iteration, because it's delivered in so many different places with children having completely different proclivities of what they're learning.
One thing to add on to that, which it was always a big point of learning for me personally, is just not making assumptions about what we believe to be an urban learning experience and believe to be a rural learning experience. I grew up in New York, and basketball is an institution in New York. And at a conference a couple of years ago, I had someone come up to me and say, I'm from Alaska. This program needs to be in Alaska because children across rural Alaska play basketball almost universally as a primary sport, because it's easy to play, it's easy to get to, it's easy to access, right? Especially in a remote area. And I had never, ever considered that in my life. But that's a truth. So, or a truth so much as they shared with me. So I think just not trying to contextualize, cultural, local relevance is really, really important in education, but also not going to the point where we assume that a student in a certain place may not like something because of our own preconceptions.
Just to add, Gemma, this is why we don't put, Imagine Science doesn't put out one curriculum for all of our sites. It's locally defined and developed, or it's national curricula that's locally adapted, and that's where the teams work together. And I think we've had the most success in engaging the program leaders in content, like in adapting or in finding specific examples or local hands-on activities or information to incorporate into a national curricula. That's where we've had the most success, because they come from the communities they serve. They're representative of the kids, and they know their kids better than any of us do. So I think for us, that's really where we've been able to make the relevance happen. But definitely agree with what Nick's saying. There's so many things we've learned about what kids like and don't like, and it's sometimes irrelevant to where they live or where they're from. So that's been interesting.
Thank you all so much for these insights. I think it's invaluable to this community, and I hope all of you who joined us today share in my appreciation for these 4 leaders and the work of their organizations, and share in our optimism about the future of after-school STEM. And with that, I'd like to thank the Campaign for Grade Level Reading for hosting us, and welcome Sarah back onto the stage.
Excuse me, sorry. I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you. I've been sitting here for the past hour and a half wishing that I had these programs available to me when I was a kid, and wishing that my daughter had access to them right now. So thank you all so much for joining us to share these really creative, engaging, and innovative programs. Thank you to Nafdal Johnson, to Britt Magnuson, to Nick Monzi, and to Chris San Antonio for joining us. Thank you so much, Gemma Lenowitz, for helping to plan this conversation and to recruiting and engaging these amazing panelists with us today. And then I'd also just love to say thank you to all of you who took the time to join in and learn with us today. I hope that you will register and make plans to join us for the upcoming sessions that are just now coming up onto the screen, I believe, that we have in the remainder of 2021. Next week, we're going to have a double header, which will start with a Crucible of Practice session exploring evidence-based strategies that are being implemented in Dayton, Ohio at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, followed by a 3 p.m. session, in which we'll hear from leaders from different states about retention policies and how they're working to make sure that children are on track to succeed. And then the following week on the 21st, we'll start off the day with a Funder to Funder conversation focused on parent-child relationships and early relational health. Links for all of those are posted in the chat box. And then also stay tuned. We are going to be rebroadcasting some special sessions over the holiday break for those of you who want to continue learning even while you are with family and away from the office possibly. So stay tuned for more information on those in the coming weeks. And until then, thank you again for joining us. Take care and be well.